So the I'm special and different crowd is trying to shut down free speech by people they don't like. I know, shocking, isn't it? National Gallery of Canada urged to cancel talk by professor who refuses genderless pronouns. Now just pause for a minute and go back in time, say 10 years, and imagine reading that headline. You probably could imagine it if you were reading The Onion, which got me to thinking, it must be increasingly difficult for The Onion to differentiate itself from reality these days. Anyway, back to the simulated reality of The Matrix. Members of Ottawa's transgender community want the National Gallery of Canada to cancel a talk by Jordan Peterson, a Toronto psychology professor who has refused to call transgender students by their preferred pronouns. Cara Tierney, a former employee of the gallery, has emailed the Federal Art Institution to try to get the Peterson talk cancelled. Certainly, if there was a known anti-Semite who also perhaps had something interesting to say about psychology and creativity, I don't imagine that we'd be inviting this individual to come and talk, Tierney said. False equivalence much? So because Peterson won't use the pronouns you want him to, he's the same as a known anti-Semite. You want to take bets on whether Tierney's pro-Palestine? And by the way, if there was a known anti-Semite speaking about psychology and creativity, he or she would have just as much right to speak about those topics as anyone else. But to have that perspective, you have to believe in free speech, which we know you don't. Tierney is an Ottawa area artist and does not identify as a man or a woman. Rather than he or she, Tierney asks people use the gender-neutral pronoun they, which is favoured by some in the transgender community. Well, that sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Let's completely change the way we use language because a tiny minority of a tiny minority want us to. That's not self-centered or narcissistic at all, is it? Peterson, who teaches psychology at the University of Toronto, became a lightning rod for controversy over campus political correctness when he argued against addressing students with their preferred gender-neutral pronouns. In previous interviews, he's claimed that being forced to use gender-neutral pronouns would amount to an imposition on the right to free speech, a dangerous precedent to demand people use certain words. And as Peterson has said numerous times, there's a distinction to be made between prohibiting people from saying certain things like yelling fire in a crowded theatre, to mandating people must use certain words, especially when that demand is coming from a small group of radical ideologues. The National Gallery of Canada said Peterson has been invited to talk because of his expertise in the field of clinical psychology. The gallery invited him to speak about his specific research interest in the psychology of creativity, a subject he's spoken about at scientific conferences across North America and about which he has co-authored over 10 scientific papers, the gallery said. Peterson sent an email to CBC News that said his invitation from the gallery preceded his recent political travails. The topic is apolitical, and the issues arising from my well-publicised stance against compelled speech are completely irrelevant to the talk, Peterson said. He said his March 9 talk will cover his research and the traits of temperament that contribute to creativity. So he's not going there to talk about pronouns or free speech, but again, even if he were, what better place to do it than an art gallery? Isn't art supposed to be all about free expression? There's so much modern art that offends my eyes, but I wouldn't want to stop people from creating or exhibiting it. Amanda Jett Knox, an LGBTQ... Wait a minute. Did you forget the plus? That sounds bigoted. And the mother of a transgender child is also pressing for the gallery to cancel the talk. When someone is as vocal as he is and is given a platform, he's carrying his views with him to that platform, she said. Art itself has always been historically a safe space for the queer community, and so when our National Art Gallery is giving space to somebody who is very anti-LGBTQ, then what does that say about our country? Well, it means despite the Trudeau cuckening of Canada, some people in your country still believe in freedom of speech and expression. And the idea that an art gallery is a safe space is absurd. Peterson has often railed against the idea that a classroom should be a safe space. In fact, he goes out of his way to frighten his students by invoking the horrors of history. And an art gallery is no different. I mean, should we remove Picasso's Guernica? How about Michelangelo's Last Judgment? And what about anyone that's depicted Dante's Inferno? Should we throw out all the Botticellis? And what about museums? We'd have to close all those down as well. I remember as a kid going to the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. There is some horrific history in there, but it's fascinating as well. And I've been to the museums in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Should we forget about those? Nothing to see here? You've probably noticed this tendency of snowflakes to invoke false notions of safety, as though being exposed to opinions carries the same risk as playing NFL football. Jonathan Haidt calls this concept creep, the conflation of real concerns about physical safety with imagined ones. And another such defense they like to invoke is the idea that pronouns are a sign of respect. This is just absolute nonsense. If I say, gee, he's tall, you know exactly what to look for. You're looking for a tall male. It's just a simple identifier. And there seems to be an inherent contradiction here from the pronoun ideologues. They want to assert that their gender is whatever they deem it to be, and they don't need anyone's permission to identify the way they want. Yet they are insisting we should use their preferred pronouns, which suggests on some level, even if accidentally, that they realise at a minimum your identity is a negotiation between the individual and the larger society. But anyway, I think it would be fitting to close out this video with Jordan Peterson taking on this question of pronouns being a sign of respect.
When we're talking about whether you can force someone to refer to you or refrain from referring to you in different ways, I guess one issue that I'm having difficulty with is what a pronoun is. I think we'd all acknowledge that you have a right to force people to refer to you in certain ways. If a professor had a class and they had a student who insisted on calling them a girl when they were male, or calling them queer or something, or I can think of way worse words, they would say, well, that's not a pronoun, that's a derogatory label that's just meant to degrade me. But who's to say what is a pronoun? And I'm not sure that it necessarily would change if 95 or 97 friends all insisted on sort of degrading or using that pejorative label to the person. And I think that people who are transgendered or whatever do experience when people use the wrong gender labels to them. They've experienced real prejudice. They experience it as kind of oppressive in that way. So I don't know if identity is a subject or an object, but I do know that we place important demands on one another. I don't know about nature, but I know that fundamentally, like, our society is going to work better if we respect each other, and I think history bears that out. That self-respect and allowing people's self-identification to play a role in that public aspect. We do already have limits on how people can refer to each other, and they're informed by how people want themselves to be referred to.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of questions. So, and that's, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck about that. It's just, I'm going to have to sort that out for a minute. Okay? Well, the first thing I would say is, pronouns, and I'm not a linguist, so I'm not going to be able to whip this off the top of my head, although I do know that there is a psychologist named James Pennebaker who's written a whole book on pronouns, which you might be interested in referring to, and pronouns turn out to be extraordinarily important as signifiers, but they're also part of what's called a closed linguistic category, and they don't change. And so that's something that's useful to know. But you also bring up the distinction, or the lack of distinction, or made a lack of distinction between adjectives and pronouns. And that's pretty interesting, because there's no real reason why, if you can't insist upon which pronoun I use to address you, you can't also insist on which adjective I use to address you. And there's a lot more adjectives. And so that's, because I don't see, like, if you can choose your damn pronoun, why can't you choose your adjective? Adjectives are, the words you listed as pejorative were actually not pronouns, they were adjectives. And so you can object to them. And there's no shortage of times when you use a pejorative adjective to describe someone, especially if you believe that they've misbehaved. It's like, if the person can insist upon their pronoun, why can't they insist upon their adjective? And that's another part of this problem with this multiplicative complexity, that it isn't addressed properly within the law. With regards to respect, you said, well, human civilization progresses a lot better if we respect one another, and I actually don't believe that at all. I believe that human civilization progresses and maintains itself when we respect people who've earned respect. You don't just respect everybody randomly. Well, what the hell use is respect if you just respect people randomly? It's like inflating the currency, you know? It's like the Simpsons episode where, you know, Bart gets a trophy because it's every child gets a trophy day. All you do is inflate the currency. Respect is actually limited to that category of people who have earned respect in some manner. So whatever you're talking about with regards to, say, common decency between people, it's not respect. And the definitions actually matter. They matter a lot. And so I hear the respect argument all the time, but you also can't force me to respect you. I mean, you might be able to force me to act like I respect you, but you can't force me to respect you. It's just not possible. You could break me, I suppose, and then perhaps I would do it, although I can't see exactly how precisely. But so there's a number of, I mean, I get your point, and I'm not trying to denigrate it in any sense. There's a complex issue here, which is to what degree do you allow individuals to govern the conversation that's had about them in their presence or otherwise. But I would just revert back to my original argument, which is that's a negotiation. It's either a negotiation. You got 3 states. You can negotiate with someone. You can be their slave, or you can be their tyrant. And I would pick negotiation, but as far as I'm concerned, the law right now, as it's currently instantiated, is a tyrant, and it makes people into its slave, and we're going to pay for that. And it's predicated on, hypothetically, on respect and compassion. I don't buy that for a second.
And neither do I. Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, or if you're feeling generous, support me on Patreon. See you next time.